Religious institutions and their networks have always been a powerful tool in shaping societies by laying their moral grounds and impacting the social and political structures. With the growing religious pluralism and growing interests in influencing world affairs, more religious players have entered the geopolitical arena. Along with the strong traditional players like the Roman Catholic Church, new religious communities are engaging not only into social and development practices, but also into politics. While varying widely in what they seek to achieve, they also share an important characteristic. Each seeks to use religious soft power to advance certain values and norms as well as interests. The greater political engagement of religious entities, therefore, sparks the question of their objectives and their independence from the state structures of the countries of their origin. Have religious actors become an extended arm of states? Do states use their religious networks for more influence? And what is the gap that religious actors are feeling that allows them an entrance into the societies and the exercise of their role? Exploring the dynamics of this new religious pluralism as it influences the global political landscape is critical. How do we address the paradox of how transnational religious actors, lacking the military or economic resources of states or transnational corporations, have managed to impact the contemporary world in such unexpected and contradictory ways? How do we unpack the role of religion in contemporary international relations? Who are the transnational actors and what are their interests or motivating agenda? And how should the legal framework address the need of religious freedom while limiting the political interference through religious communities?
Myself, I am Emily Comfort Marashto. I am the Director, Africa Policy Center at Uganda Christian University, and I'm a media expert. Thank you very much for this panel. I want to thank all the organizers, the UN Women and organizers of Kampala Geopolitics for this session. I would like to then start with Samuel. I hope that is okay. Samuel, just say hello so that we can hear you.
Yes, you hear me?
Okay, very well. Thank you. I'll start with you, Samuel. And first of all, I would like you to quickly take a tour of who the religious actors are and what that really means for transnational politics.
I think in France, we have a very specific situation with what we call the laïcité or the French secularism. It depends because it's really hard to translate laïcité in English. And the fact is that if there is probably one country in the world where religions are not the arms of the state, it's France. But on the same time, it's true that many countries abroad are really involved into religious life in France. We know that for Islam, especially, there is this challenge with the question of the funding of the different religious communities. Some communities are able to fund by themselves with the help of the believers and the practitioners, but for some others, they depend on big organizations abroad. And that's why we can say that in France we have three kinds of Muslim communities. Some of them are absolutely autonomous. Others are depending on big NGOs or international organizations, sometimes close from an ideology than another. And the third part is directly connected to what we call the consulate of the other countries. And for this part, we can see that the international affairs of these countries, Tunisia, Morocco, Algeria, and Turkey, is part of the religious life in France. And for example, when the French president does a speech about the French secularism, about laïcité in France, to speak about the funding and the religious life of the country, it's always interesting to realize that many countries abroad react to the decision which is supposed to be only a decision inside the French situation, inside the French country, but countries abroad react and they comment the French presidential decision.
Thank you, Sebastian. What would you consider to be, it's good that you give us an overview of who these international religious actors actually are, but what do you consider to be their influence in the societies where they actually exist?
I'm not sure about your question. The influence is about the countries abroad in the religious life in France, or the influence of religions in the French society? Just to be sure to understand your question well.
No, the question is, what would you consider to be their main influence in their societies, these religious actors?
Yes, I think the religious actors, especially in France, the difficulty with the two kind of definition of laicity, because for some people, laicity is only a principle, which is a way to organize the government and the state, and it's how the public authority is dealing with rights and duty when it comes to religious diversity. But for some others, laicity is also a value, which means that it's connected to morality, and that kind of morality could be, for some people, a way to reduce the influence of religions in the society. So when you take the second definition of laicity, often you have the situation of a kind of cultural war about the influence, because some people do they just realize that the influence of the religions in the society is really decreasing every year. People practice less and less, and they belong less and less years after years to religious community, even if they continue to believe. They practice and they belong less, but they believe more, according to the statistics. And the decreasing of the influence of the religions in the society is sometimes connected to this cultural war between people who think that the influence should be really low. But I have this very concrete example. Like in 2015, the French Minister of Interior was interviewed at the National Assembly about a survey that states that French people want less visibility of religions in the public sphere, because the survey said that people are disturbed, are annoyed by the hijab, by the cross, by the kippah in the street. And the French Minister of the Interior at that time, 2015, Bernard Cazeneuve, was very famous to be a very strong secular, very strong laic guy. But even if he was involved in laicity, he says, this is not the goal of the laicity to reduce the influence of the public sphere, and if the religious would have more influence in the public sphere, they could have it, and if you want to struggle against it, it's not with laicity, it's with freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, with morality, with different definition of culture, but it's not with laicity. So I would say, to conclude about this question, that the influence of religions in France is really smaller than before, but there are currently more visibility of this cultural war between people who want to make more religions the public sphere and people who want to make less.
Thank you. I would like to pass this on to Sebastian. Sebastian, I hope you can hear me. Please say hello so that we know you are hearing us.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very well. Thank you very much. Now, I would like to come to you. I know you have done a lot of work in Latin America, and my question to you is, to what extent are some of these religious actors actually, you know, an extension of the state now? They kind of work like another arm of the state. Drawing from your experience in both Latin America and internationally, please, I'm sure this audience would want to hear that.
Yes, a pleasure to join you. Hello to all of you from Montevideo, Uruguay. It's a big pleasure to speak about this to an African audience. I have part of my history in Africa because I used to work in the UN peace mission in Côte d'Ivoire. Even it's West Africa, not East Africa. But so I kind of relate also to some of the issues that you're discussing today. Right. To go to the issue, I found this question very interesting because I think when you talk about evangelical churches, it's not a top-down understanding of religion, it's a bottom-up understanding of religion. Seeing that evangelical churches try to influence the state action, not vice versa. So it's the religious actors that would push authorities and not the authorities that would use the evangelical groups. This has to do with the fact that in difference to Catholic Church, which of course is hierarchical, we all know that, which has a long history of being close to states in Latin America, especially already during the colony and then in the beginning of the time when Latin Americans had their own republics. The evangelical churches come from down because they were implanted by European immigrants at some moment. And first of all, they wanted to stay out of politics because they just wanted to profess their faith peacefully, alone, on their own. In contrast, and they were asking for the state to protect them, sometimes also from the overreach of the Catholic Church. So, but they grew vigorously because the Catholic Church at some moment was not in all, let's say, for example, shanty towns and all the places where poor people are, they were far, whereas evangelical churches grew and mushroomed everywhere. And I'm talking, this is very important, about evangelical churches, because it's lots of churches. So even though when you want to talk about the political influence of those churches, you always have to make that difference. And sometimes the agendas are not necessarily the same. There are some common denominators. If you want me to talk about them, I will be happy to do that. But I think the first answer on the question is, I don't see any state who wants to use them, but I see them who want to use the state. If they are successful or not, that's another question. And that depends a lot on the relationship that the presidents, the governments have with them. And there we see that we have an increasingly high share of evangelical political leaders, some of them in parliament, or even presidents who have, let's say, a special relation with those groups, being themselves not really from evangelical churches. Like, for example, Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, former Guatemalan President Jimmy Morales, or others.
Thank you. And I'm just wondering, in your context, do you find that the church and the state are separated, or they are kind of fused in some areas?
Yeah, this is a good question. The question is, how do you define separation of church and state? Of course, every time there is only one country that has a state religion in South America, which in Latin America, which is Costa Rica, but this is more a historic thing. It's still a Catholic state, but it's not really affecting day-to-day life. So we have, of course, laicité in some places like Uruguay. It's quite French because the Uruguayans looked at France when they built up their modern state in the 1930s, and others where it's closer, like Peru, Ecuador. So, but it's always the Catholic Church and the state. It's never the evangelical churches and the state. And that's why historically there has been an opposition between those two groups, which now is not that much anymore, because especially conservative Catholic groups and some evangelical pressure groups would gather around what they call the moral agenda, which does not only have to do with issues like abortion, same-sex marriage, but also with a general aim of trying to moralize society. The discourse of evangelical leader in politics is essentially moral, it's not political. So what they also would say is that let's clean the mess, let's kill corruption, let's end with all these bad practices. So there is a general approach that they come to moralize public sphere, like bringing a logic from a church to the political sphere. And but apart from this moral agenda, often these pastors who go into politics don't have much to offer because they don't have detailed programs about, let's say, the pension system, the security sector, education, like all issues that in a normal political context would be important. So they're moralists, they're not administrators. And this shows when they start governing. So in that sense, what is separation between state and religion? I think it is good if there is religious people in state positions, because it's good if there is people from all kinds of state positions, like these represent society. And of course, it's not that they're completely detached from their faith. It's also dangerous to say, oh, there is an evangelical person in a public office, so there is a problem with separation between church and state. What we did with our main investigator was a separation, very interesting separation, which I want to share with you, which is between political evangelics and evangelical politicians. A political evangelic is basically someone who is a pastor, who is a churchman, and who takes the logic of the church to public sphere. This can entail some dangers because he might not see the whole of society and might impose some views which are religious, let's say, on the whole society. The other one, the evangelical politician, is essentially a politician. That means that there's a person of evangelical faith, but his mission or her mission is politics. So this person can be a good politician, a bad politician, and go to church on Sunday or to cult or wherever he or she wants to go. And keep in mind also the matters of everybody in society, those who are as religious as they are or not. So I think in that sense, to have people of faith trying to become politicians is good, but not necessarily acting in politics like they would act from the pulpit of a church. It's a completely different cup of tea, and it's also in their understanding to interpret well this separation of church and state. Some do, some do not. It's a very diverse panorama, I would say.
Thank you very much. And I think I want to go back to, first of all, let me welcome Charles Serwanja. Charles, you're most welcome. Thank you for joining us for this panel. The question is, in Uganda, given where you sit at the Inter-Religious Council, what role has the religious organizations been able to play in our local society here?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Now, I work with the Inter-Religious Council of Uganda that brings together all the denominations to address issues of common good. And we've done a great deal of trouble in trying to bring together all the religious leaders to try and harmonize their positions, especially on dealing with issues of common good and building and generating consensus on some of the most controversial issues, like even family planning that has been a long headache, especially when it comes to our colleagues from the Catholic Church. And we have also made some great effort in working with government and in challenging some of the key positions of government, although sometimes this is compromised in the way the state has tried to manage the affairs of religious leaders. We have a situation in Uganda where every bishop, every district Qadi for the Muslims, every field president for the SDA, when they are being consecrated in their roles, they are all given vehicles. So you know what that means when it comes to a government facilitating these leaders, it now compromises them in a way of holding the government accountable. And this is some of the things we are dealing with. And sometimes our leadership is slow on holding government accountable in some areas because they feel they'll be losing out on the freebies that they receive from government as faith communities. But for us, I think around issues of SRH, HIV and GBV mainly, where we get some support from our partners, UNFPA, we've made very good progress in mobilizing our leadership, which largely is male-led from the national level to the subnational level. And we have consensus as a country on some of these common issues of sexual reproductive health, HIV and gender-based violence. And I think this is a platform, it's a good movement, it's a good progress and achievement in our country. And we're able to continue with the community social mobilization using these tools without any more controversy as it used to be some years ago. So that's where we are as a country, and perhaps that's briefly what I have to share with you for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Talking about influence, you have been doing work around HIV/AIDS and sexual reproductive health. Do you find some of your work actually influencing public policy in this country?
Yes, this we have done. In fact, one of our mandates as IRC is influencing policies and practices, and we have done a great deal of trouble in putting government and our development partners to the spot on a number of policies. The one was we are still battling with the mobilizing local resources through what we call the Aid Trust Fund, which the government has been very sloppy in terms of putting resources on site to support our HIV and AIDS response in the country. We've done some great deal of trouble that now the Ministry of Health no longer develops any policies, any guidelines without the extensive consultation of the Inter-Religious Council of Uganda. The most recent one is the development of the treatment literacy as far as HIV and AIDS is concerned, where there was a long week consultation with the religious leaders before this material is actually put on the table for dissemination, and we were the key stakeholders. And just today, a couple of hours ago, the Uganda AIDS Commission, an entity that coordinates the HIV/AIDS response in the country on behalf of government, put in place what they call the faith-based HIV action plan for the next 5 years. And this is going to be coordinated by the Inter-Religious Council of Uganda. We will be coordinating the responses of all the faith-based organizations in Uganda to ensure that they align all the interventions to this action plan. So that's how far we've come as a country, that we are never left behind when it comes to these policy issues. Thank you. Over to you.
And you have just heard from the Ugandan panelists about the extent to which they have been able to influence policy on the local scene here. What about internationally? Do you find that religious organizations actually do not only seek political influence, but also influence public policy, bringing issues of the private to the public?
Yes, I think there is a difference between the faith group, and policy pressure groups in which people of faith play a role. In the second, certainly, yes, of course, there is coalitions, let's say, of people with a more conservative value set, who are, for example, active on the abortion issue, as there is also people who are active, let's say, promoting abortion access. It's pressure groups, and for me, this is part of normalcy of democratic society. So I don't see this as a big drama in itself. I think it's important that societies can come together, that faith leaders play their role, that of course they have. I sometimes think that we tend to over-focus on some of these issues, because there's also other things where religious leaders play a role, or let's say, we over-focus on the issue of human sexuality sometimes in these issues, because I think there's other issues where religious leaders play a huge role. For example, there is examples in Latin America that evangelical Christians and evangelical groups are much less prone to drug abuse. So, because preachers would preach that taking drugs is bad, that businesses would like to hire evangelical Christians as staff because they are known as being a hard worker. So when you are in a continent where there is lots of violence and where there's lots of drugs, especially in some of the northern countries of the continent, and you have a state which is absent, you have a Catholic Church which is weak in some of the places like Honduras, it's more evangelicals than Catholics, then the only real person you can rely on are religious leaders. So you can kind of sometimes try to transform the so-called moral agenda and not focus it only on sex issues, but also going more integrally and talking about violence, about drugs, about abuse. And I think there is a lot of potential working with religious leaders on these issues, which I sometimes feel is not sufficiently taken into consideration due to the focus on the 2-3 issues that are always being discussed about. So I'm not saying that these issues are not important. I think they matter. I think they matter having a respectful conversation on all of this. But it's not the only issues where, let's say, religious leaders can also help bringing about development.
Thank you, Sebastian. And I will at this point go to Samuel. Sebastian, I'll be coming back to you with the question of whether these, especially evangelical churches, have their own agenda or they pursue the agenda of the state. But right now, I'm coming to Samuel. I hope I've got it right this time. Samuel for Samuel. Yes. Yes, Samuel, I wanted to pick your mind on the question of resources. How do organizations such as yours actually manage to impact their societies without the kind of economic and military power that the state normally has?
Yes, that's a really good question. I think there's 2 dimensions. The first is the resources of the religious communities, and the second is the resources of the interfaith or interreligious organizations from the civil society, and the issues are different. I want to be back about the religious communities because the things you mentioned before with Sebastian remind me that the difference we make with Coexiste, our NGO, between the freedom of faith and what we call the responsibility of faith, or what we call also faith for good. Because it's really often that religious communities are keen on actions to defend their religious freedom, and that's normal because it's human rights, Article 10 or 18 according to the text you choose. But it's really hard for some religions to recognize that they have a responsibility about the sustainable goals, about climate change, about gender equality. And when religious communities are involved into these issues, they could have a kind of faith for good, like, we talk about tech for good or energy for good or economy for good. So this is a kind of faith for good, beliefs for good, because they consider that they have a responsibility to change the society. So on that way, it's not that religious communities need resources to change the world, it's that they are resources to change the world. Religious communities are resources because they have a big power to empower people with their mind and with the deepest part of their souls, and it's really powerful to be able to empower people on that issue. And the second part, the other question to me is the resources of our NGO, the Interfaith Cooperation NGOs or Interreligious Dialogue Organization. And you mentioned, and I launched a social enterprise which is named Convivencia. It's the Spanish word, and Convivencia is belonging to Coexiste, our movement. And Convivencia is part of the social economy. It's a social enterprise, and the way we organize the resources is it's 3/3. We have a third from ourselves, like we sell training, we sell advices, we sell consulting with this company. We sell sometimes also T-shirts with the logo of Coexiste, with the the C for Islam, the X for Judaism, and the cross for Christianity. And this brand is really famous in France, and the way we sell it, it's very impactful because the brand is positive. It sends a good message into society to say that religions could live together and collaborate together in the same place. It's good for us because the money we launch with we raise with this shirt is helpful for the project. And it's also good for the people that use the T-shirts because they can spread the message in the tube or in the metro, or in the streets, etc. The second third of the resources for us is the big companies that want to improve their own responsibility and to participate to this effort of interfaith and interreligious cooperation. And the third is to continue to work with the state, even if we don't have the power of the government. The government could be aware that the responsibility has to make peace stronger. You know, there's this very, very famous motto from the Roman Empire that says that if you want peace, you should prepare war. And one of the motto of our movement is if you want peace, you should prepare peace. It means that even if peace is seen as something checked, like a box that you click, it's over. And that's very important, especially on this day, because you know November 11th is the anniversary of the end of the war. I wouldn't say peace, but just the end of the war between Germany and France in 1918. And most of the time in Pacific countries like France see itself, we think that peace is something done, that it's checked and it's over, but it's wrong. If you want to make peace strong and sustainable, you have to prepare it all the time. So that's why government should help interfaith organization in the society to anticipate that the way to violence, the way to exclusion, the way to discrimination is really highway, really highway. So it's really important for the government to be part of this effort and to not let civil society organizations do it by themselves.
Okay, I'll come back to Charles. I think, Sebastian, I'll end with you. Let me come back to Charles. Charles, I think you can attempt this question. How do we actually unpack the role of religious organizations or the role of religion in contemporary international relations? I'm very sure where you sit, much as you're more concerned with national affairs, you must be at least relating with some international relations as well.
Now, the Interreligious Council of Uganda is not only focusing on the indigenous challenges as a country, but we also are members of the African Council of Religious Leaders and African Council of Religions for Peace. So we've played a key role in issues of peace and democracy in our region, mediating in some of the factions in South Sudan, in our neighbors here. We've also participated in engaging dialogue meetings in Kenya, especially pre- and post-election periods of some of our neighboring countries. So we've stretched our mandate way beyond just Uganda or just at national issues. And that's how we've gone. We've had our leaders, being invited to different countries to share our experiences as a country, because we've noted that I think there are not so many countries have been able to bring together the voices of all the major denominations together. And Uganda is quite exemplary. It's a success story. You rarely find controversy among the major denominations. And therefore, many countries, many leaders have picked up Uganda, the IRCU leadership, going to Rwanda, going to the DR Congo, or the DR Congo leadership of our leaders coming to Uganda to learn from us. So that's how we've stretched into the international arena to try and share experiences and perhaps lend them a hand on organizing some different dialogues to try to make sure we bring peace. Because peace is not only just the absence of war, peace means a lot beyond what we think it can be in the contemporary world. So that's how far we've stretched beyond our borders. Over to you.
Thank you, Charles, Mr. Charles Serwanja. I will now end with our final question, Sebastian, so that we can have the audience also ask some questions.
The final question, can you repeat it, please? Which one?
The final question was, I hope I remember what final question I did ask, but it had to do with the agenda of the church. Does the evangelical church have its own agenda, or it actually pursues the agenda of the state?
I think the evangelical church has very much its own agenda. As I said, that there is not a big relation in general between the evangelical churches and the state. It's more that the evangelical churches are often seen as not as the most easiest people to deal with, especially also due to their atomization, because you don't know who to call when you want to call the evangelical church, because there are like so many different pastors and different churches. And this is one of the issues when we talk about the evangelical vote. There's been lots of try to get the evangelical vote, like through policy offers, through evangelical candidates. But what we have seen in all our research is that it didn't really work. Evangelicals don't necessarily vote for evangelicals. Evangelicals, like any voters, vote for who they think that would best fit their political interests. This can be an evangelical, can be not an evangelical. What, yes, we have observed is that pastors can inform or influence the voters of faithful. That means that electors would feel that their pastor has a moral authority telling them who to vote, yes. But as there are so many pastors, the pastors also have different political preferences. So there's no monolithic evangelical voting bloc. And this makes it extremely difficult for the state. Who shall the state talk to? So what I think is it's necessary to engage them on issues, to create roundtables, to create and to use also the potential that the connections of these groups to poor sectors of society, to marginalized sectors of society has, in order to bring about change on important issues. As I said, drug addiction, violence, sexual and gender-based violence, and lots of other issues too. I would like to say that I personally believe that as anything, religion is a very, very positive issue for a state, because religious people normally tend to be involved with common good, and this is something that that you can pick up as a state and make it useful for a common good agenda. In Latin America, of course, it has become a bit more difficult with the evangelical churches for the reasons I said. But this changes in society. We see that now in Latin America we have like 25% of population evangelicals and only like 60% Catholics. Before it was completely different. So and the evangelicals are growing and the Catholics are decreasing. Societies don't become less religious, they become less Catholic. Maybe it's different here in maybe in Uruguay or in Argentina, where there's secularism is very important, and there is lots of people who don't have a faith anymore. But in large part of the region, it's shifting the political panorama. So politics should adjust to the shifting panorama, not by repeating everything the evangelical leaders say, but by engaging them in discussions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sebastian, Samuel, and Charles. I will now come back to our audience here and ask that the audience may also ask some questions. I have been asking the panelists some questions, and we have discussed a number of issues, including religious influence, both on national and international politics. We've discussed the influence of religion on policy. They've also discussed some of the gaps that religious institutions are filling in society, as well as the church having its own agenda. So I'm happy to have some questions from the audience, and I think we can start over there. 1, 2, 3. Any other? Because I'm not going to take more questions after this lot. We are almost running out of time. Okay, so let's start here.
Thank you very much. Mujisha Robert is my name. And I want to thank all the panelists for the work they have done in explanation of these key important things. As an African, and Uganda in particular, our history with the civilization and the kind of world we're in today is not separated from religion. And we date it back to the coming of the missionaries that came and shared with us the religious values that they had. And as they introduced that to the African land, in the first place, that was transnationalism. And as we adopt those values and we associate ourselves with those religious denominations and those groupings, and we follow them, that give rise to the current religions that we have, and that is why we have such things like interreligious councils come into play. I feel that there is a role that we need to do in these various religious groupings. One, as we are relating it to state and the policies, is that each of these people that are in the state running and the politics must be belonging to a given group of the denomination. And therefore, if the religious actors are grooming the leaders right from the beginning, it is not lost on me that by the time they assume those positions, they will enact laws, they will bring bills that bring a sense of humanity, one with themselves and the states next to them, because they have that religious background, and also as the religion itself, as we teach and transfer these values in our church sessions, it is important to note that let the politicians play their part. Because when you find a religious leader giving a political campaign in a church session, and it's like, by the way, as a church, we are tired of this and this. That happened in the recent elections here in Uganda. We saw that. And I think there we lose the point. Now, to come on the global arena, we think, since we were able to pick some of these views from them, the question that comes now as an African, could it be true that since we were able to have that transnationalism and we adopted some of their values, now can the outside world also listen and welcome our religion from home? Because we also had a religion. Does that address the fact that the superiority question has to remain existing, that Africa has a lesser and insignificant religion, that only religions we have to recognize are the ones that we adopted from those that came to us first? Is there room that I have a platform to stand and share with them the reasons as to why I might believe in a different culture and religion? Because I believe solidly every being is spiritual, much as not religion. In my conclusion, a teacher, a pastor, and a politician can pass out the same message, including a musician, to different audiences in the most appropriate ways. So let everyone play their part, but humanity first. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think Sebastian and company will answer that question. How do we ensure that religious organizations actually groom leaders and politicians who go to make laws already by values that they get from the church? And the second question has to do with indigenous religious organizations. Thank you very much. The second question?
Thank you very much, moderator. My name is James Okol. I am the youth councillor of Kwania district here in Uganda. Mine is not more of a question, but I just have an opinion to make about that. According to my understanding, I think religions and the state are inseparable. We cannot do away with the other because many of these leaders belong to a certain religion. And in most countries, we find that they are either a religious state kind of. For example, we have the Islamic State that also have the values of the Islamic religion. And then also in the Christian states, they also follow the values of the Christianity. So to me, I think they're inseparable. But for a church and the nation to stand very well, each must play its own primary roles. For example, a church is supposed to humble humanity in order to obey the leaders that they elect. So if you separate these people...
Is that because you're a leader?
No, I think that is the reality. That is the reality according to me. That is my own perspective. So I encourage that let the church leaders, let the religious leaders play the role of modeling people and obeying the leaders so that these two do not have conflict. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that's a very critical question. Comment rather, and you're free to comment on it as panelists. The issue is the church and the state might be inseparable, but each of these play their primary role and play it well. I think that's the main issue. Lastly?
Thank you so much for an opportunity. I'm Chomendo Janina. I represent the young people of Mbara City. Mine goes to Charis. Yeah, we appreciate the role that these institutions are playing in our country. For the case in Uganda, why is it that we continue to see the less involvement and participation of religious leaders and institutions in activities like human rights, whereby in this country we've had cases of human rights violations, but we don't see the religious leaders come on front line. The fact that they have numbers and people who believe in them, despite of religious aspects or differences, but we would wish to see them on front line, spearheading these activities. But we've not seen them. So what's hindering their interventions? Is it because, just like he said, that the state is influencing them, just like we already see every time they are being put in the offices, the bishops, the district cards, they are given vehicles. Could it be, or there are some other issues that probably we don't know and would want to know so that they can be addressed? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I would want to first comment about the negligent acts of some churches in Uganda, whereby we have seen some instances, church leaders misleading some of its sheep, the so-called sheep. And my question goes to Mr. Seranja. Upon these churches misleading some of the citizens in Uganda, for example, there was a moment, a certain time, when a church leader told his followers to go and sell all their properties and all their pieces of land and bring the money so as to secure a seat in heaven. And now my question goes to Mr. Seranja. What has the Interreligious Council come up with, for example, like regulations in relation with the parliament in order to brush out these bad negligent acts of churches? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That has a lot to do with the role of religious organizations, the network organizations such as the one Serwanja works for in making sure that their members, some of their members actually do not take advantage of their flock. So I'll have the panel respond to these questions, and because most of the questions went to Charles, I'll start with Samuel to respond to any of the questions, if you can, and then Sebastian, and we will end with Charles. That will use up our time. I think I'll give each of you 1 minute. I would like to borrow at least 3 minutes in order for the panelists to conclude. Thank you very much, and thank you for all who have asked those questions.
I think I would answer the second and the third question, and especially about the second. I just want to share that I absolutely not agree with the idea that state and religious are inseparable. I think as long as states are able to separate with the religious communities and the religious organizations, they make possible that religious freedom is strictly respected. And I don't have any example where the state and the religious are absolutely merged and the religious freedom is respected. So I think it's in the interest of the religious themselves to respect the separation between the state and the religious community. But separation doesn't mean ignorance or confrontation. You have different kind of separation. It's true that the separation in France is one of the hardest we have in the world, but you have different kind of separation that make possible religious freedom. I just want to take the example that the church in 1905 was really opposed at the independence of the state. But a few years later, maybe a few decades later, different popes recognized that the laicity is the only way possible to make religious freedom in a society. And just to share you a specific quote I have this amazing opportunity to meet the Pope Française 2 times, and the last time was in March 15. We had an hour of discussion about the situation in France, especially when it comes to social justice and ecological justice. And by himself, even if I didn't ask anything to the Pope about laicity or secularism, he told me by himself. It's really important to separate the state and the religious, because when the state and religion are not separated, it's like a dog coming back to, I don't know exactly the word, but it's a sentence in the Bible from the letter of St. Peter. And the Pope himself says that it's the only way. About the third question, I deeply agree, and the opposite about the idea that religious leaders can take their own responsibility for human rights. Not enough. It's true that there's a lot of religious leaders that are really involved on these questions in the world, and many died, especially in South America. But there are just few examples, and very big examples, really inspirational for youngsters, for example, to show that priests and imams and rabbis take the responsibility to protect the others, to hide some Jews during the Second World War, for example. There's a lot of examples, but there are just a few people, and currently, it's like in some ways, in democracy, political parties are more concerned about their own survival, and in religious diversity, sometimes religious communities are more concerned about their own powers than about how the world is going on. And currently, the challenge we are facing about climate change and violence and wars should make, the only point would be how it could be helpful to the society. And if we believe in God, we should know that God is enough strong himself to convert people, and he doesn't need religions to do it. So why he needs religions and religious communities is to serve the world like it is, and to help different nations and people to achieve human rights and to achieve the struggle against climate change.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Samuel Grybowski. And I will now move on to Charles, not Charles, but to Sebastian. Sebastian, your final word, and responding to some of the questions.
I liked a lot what the first person said about the African heritage and learning from Africa. I completely agree with that. I think it's when you have a dialogue, when you have a friendship, it has to be a reciprocal cycle. So that means we all can learn a lot from each other. I just want to share in that sense, one thing I found very impressive during my time in Africa was the climate of religious tolerance. I have to say that that Muslim Christian families, a Muslim marrying a Christian in a Christian church was no problem. There was like no issue on this. I found lots of happy, Africans like to dance and sing, as you know. ecumenism just by living together and sharing the same spaces, no matter, it was not a problem when someone changed from Islam to Christianity or from Christianity to Islam, and this person was still embraced in the family. And I thought some places how bitter we fight over religious issue and how horrible sometimes and intolerant religion can be at times for people who don't agree with religious postulates. We can look to Africa. I'm sure there's also other, let's say, things, but I lived my experience from my African friends is a very, very tolerant approach to this, at least in Cote d'Ivoire. About the grooming leaders and obey to leaders, big thing. I don't think, first of all, Islamic State identifies with Islamic values. I have great Muslim friends who have completely different values than the horrendous totalitarian idea of women, of almost everything that Islamic State has. So I would absolutely challenge that. But I do think that more than obeying to leaders, I think that religious leaders have a responsibility to make people be a good citizen. And being a good citizen implies also act according to laws, according to the rule of law, respect. And this is what they should do. Like, whether they have to listen or obey, which is a very strong word, to any leaders all the time, that remains to be seen. But to win people for democracy, for freedom, for human rights, for social justice, for climate action, for for a cleaner planet, which is our common home, it's a beautiful issue that religious leaders can and should definitely engage. Thanks a lot for having me. Big pleasure. Hope I can come one day to Kampala, and I'm sure that the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation will do an excellent job. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. Please keep online as we have the final panelist respond. Charles, you're most welcome to respond to the questions that were directed at you, and you're going to be our final speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for those very interesting questions. I'll begin with the question of issues of human rights. Now, I'd like to inform the audience that the religious leaders are not activists. And we must differentiate between activism and perhaps issues of dialogue and, engaging some of these issues in a more, constructive manner. On many occasions, we've had issues of human rights, especially during elections, issues of the key populations. The key populations, and on many occasions, without perhaps being in the public domain, our leadership, the council, has engaged His Excellency the President on many of these issues. And you will notice that you may see him toning down or coming to the TV to issue new statements and whatever, but behind those scenes, we've had a series of meetings with the President, and we are dialoguing on issues of human rights, on issues of elections, pre and post-election, issues and violence that has been happening in our country. We've also, it's on record that we've issued statements as IRCU on condemning some of the practices, especially the state agencies, the police, the army, and we've condemned them. It's on record. And therefore, we always engage these issues, much as you don't see many of our faith communities or leaders in the public domain, because it's more or less dialogue. We've studied the politics of Uganda. Our president and perhaps most of our leaders today, they do not want that culture of you opting for the public, domain in trying to highlight issues in the public and appear like you are opportunistic. But I think the concept of dialogue has worked very, very much for us, even bringing together the different political factions to, tone down on their language and the politics of violence. And then the issue of the rights of women, like our moderator mentioned it, we are champions from fighting for the rights of women. We are currently having initiatives of ending violence against women and girls. We've influenced policies in some of our denominations. If there are Muslims among our audience, if you go to the Uganda Muslim Supreme Council now, there's a policy there that there is no imam should ever preside over any marriage of an underage girl, because this has been very prominent in the Muslim faith. If you go to some of our communities like Sabay region, we've been a champion in fighting and ensuring that there is a law against female genital mutilation in that region, and it was passed in our country. So we've been playing a key role in fighting for the rights of women and girls in our country, and this is an agenda on the work of IRC on the entire council. And finally, the issue of the religious leaders misleading and taking advantage of our vulnerable communities. I must say that in Uganda, even the person who posed this question to me, my brother from Uganda, can wake up one day and start a church and he'll call himself a bishop. It is very possible here. When you hear of Interreligious Council of Uganda, it has membership. When you are admitted as a member of IRC, we have a constitution that governs your conduct, your behavior as a religious leader, but also as a movement that you lead as an entity. Therefore, some of these communities you hear of so-called religious leaders are not members of the Interreligious Council of Uganda. We've had in ourselves, especially from the Pentecostal movement and evangelical movement of faith leaders, in the context of HIV prevention, they have been telling people about faith healing, telling people living with HIV that they should withdraw from taking their ARVs, and they'll pray for them and they will heal. We are aware of this. We've had meetings over the same issue, and that is why we supported government in putting in place the FBO policy to regulate some of, or even all the faith-based organizations in this country. Behind that policy is about dealing with some of these cases of leaders who are hiding behind religion to try and take advantage of our religious our communities, and of course deprive them of their belongings, misleading them in terms of their beliefs and perhaps the foreign values. So we are trying to ensure that we support this policy so that we have regulations at the government level, while we play our part as the Interreligious Council of Uganda to ensure that we subscribe to the values and norms of the interfaith network in Uganda. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we have 2 minutes to end our session, and I want to use these 2 minutes to just thank the panelists. I would like to thank Samuel Grybowski. Please give him a hand clap. I would like to thank Sebastian, the other name, but let's clap for him all the same. And I would like to thank Mr. Charles Serwanja, who has joined us today. Thank you very much. Let's clap for him. But most importantly, let's clap for ourselves for being patient and for contributing to this discussion. Thank you very much. I hand over to the organizers. Thank you.